Hi, this is Dr. Scott, and today we're going to get into the fifth of the series. It took me a little time to figure that one out because I was getting four, five, six, whichever one it was. So we're going to do the fifth of the series, Essence of NESARA, because so many people keep asking questions and they're looking at one piece of the pie and they think that the other pieces are irrelevant. So we see, unfortunately, some truthers, really good people necessarily, but what they're doing is they're focusing on that one myopic point. They have a viewpoint of it. It's kind of a Clydesdale viewpoint of it. That's okay, but they diss these other areas. And I'm trying to say they're all inclusive. Okay, it's not inclusive like the DEI idiots, but this is inclusive like the reality of how to do this. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the IRS. Now, inside of this IRS issue, you have to understand it's a stream from the Fed to the IRS. Now, I want to take you back a little bit in time. I'm, early junior high to grade school time frame. It's somewhere in that range. We used to live on 5 acres. Okay. Now, I thought of it as a ranch, but it's really not a ranch because, most people who know how to what a ranch is, those are hundreds and hundreds of acres with tons of cattle. Well, we had I had pigs for a couple of years, 2 pigs a year. We had rabbits, dogs, cats, chickens who got eaten halfway by the pack of dogs, all kinds of different things, right? And my parents decided a couple years to we had a small garden we had strawberry and rhubarb and really kind of interesting stuff in there, and then we also had corn in a back area about an acre of corn, and it was so much we were carrying back wagons full of corn, and we just never ran out of corn. I mean, it was like we had corn every time I turned around, and it was just so much. And I remember having to water every day of the summer, and you get so bored watering. You had to have your little hoe out, and you kind of make the hoe go. And what happens sounds like a pun as well for Kamala, but neither here nor there. What I always was thinking about, and I would daydream and thinking about it's coming from that source and going here. And I was always thinking of that river kind of analogy. And I want you to think about that, thinking about a gardening, going the source out to the final pieces, right? And this is a pieces of the puzzle. So where's the source of the money that they're actually pulling from? Well, some of it is inflation. Some of it is quantitative easing, which is the addition of money in different ways. And we can talk about those, but those are just a piece of that puzzle. One of the largest pieces of this puzzle of where these idiots get their money is the IRS. And I want to show you a lot of information. Now we're first going to do the PowerPoint of here, and it takes me a second to bring it back up. But we will show you the PowerPoint in here and find out some of those interesting areas. It's going to take me a second to pull it. Sorry, it takes a second here. It always has to have something messing with me here. There we go. So we're going to walk through the PowerPoint first, and then we'll show you different pieces of that interesting puzzle. Okay. So again, this is the death of the IRS. Now, if you were listening to one of my old ones here, we were talking about the death of banking. Please, I might have said that too harshly. Banking doesn't die; it just dies in the sense that it has been, in essence. Okay, but in this circumstance, the IRS is really going to die with that too. And frankly, it's already in its death blows, and we'll show you more of that interesting stuff. Now, I always say this. Hey man, QFS crypto is the fakest thing in the world. Now there's a new fake with QFS cards, paying $900 or whatever it is to get these cards, to get your monies and all this other stuff. Stop. Someone, whoever that is faking you. And what it is it tends to be a whole bunch of groups of these idiots who are not even in America, who are faking my face and faking a lot of the other truthers' faces too. And this is just craziness. Don't touch them, okay? Just ignore, block, and delete, okay? Now, let's get into this. I want to first talk about the IRS mandate that comes from the 16th Amendment. Okay. So when you pull just the 16th Amendment, it says Congress has the power to lay and collect taxes on income from whatever source derived. Whoa, and you go, wait a second. When you start going from whatever source derived, like, do you know that I had a friend of ours when we were homeschooling through, they decided to, it was the Census Bureau who decided to do an audit of in their census. And I mean, it asked things like, and they had 4 kids, and they were like, well, how much does one of the kids make from mowing a lawn? And so she was required, in their kind of thing, mandated. Remember, mandate is not a law. Now, when I say the mandate, because there's so many stupid parts in here, okay? They made it a law, but they bent it in mandates. And that's just such a fascinating point. But they were asking her to put in how much he might travel to do a particular lawn and how much they had to pay. And the Census Bureau was really pushy on this stuff, okay? And this is that same kind of stuff, wherever the source derived. If you were doing this correctly, let's say, you had a job and you're doing $40,000, $50,000 a year in that job, you really need to show all the lawn mowing that you do as well on the side, or the garage sales that your wife does on the side as well, or whatever that might be. And it says, without apportionment among the several states, without regard to any census or enumeration. I mean, you're like, what? You see, it says without apportionment from among the states. So frankly, that actually, in one way, could be viewed that the states cannot do the same kind of taxation. Other people would disagree with me, but all the states have some level of taxation, other than a couple of them, like Florida and Texas, have gotten away from that. And this is the craziness. This is how they actually created a law that actually is so easily challengeable. And there's a lot of reasons for that. So it's just super, super vague. And it's been challenged in courts, because they put out conversations of being a citizen of the United States, which the only persons that are real citizens that are people who are under Social Security. By the way, I'm going to show you a video on that one. And those people who are inside of the system, maybe they get direct benefits. This is why FDR did what he did, and I'm going to show you an article on that one. And employees of the federal government. Like, whoa, that's interesting, right? Okay. A short background on it, and we got to look at the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is a level of private bankers. It's the Morgans, Rockefellers, and here's the thing, the Windsors. Now, at the time when I wrote this, it was Queen of England. Now it's the King. But frankly, they're both, you and I both know they're all dead anyway. But it also includes the other central bankers. This is what they do in every one of them. And they're all connected, guys, with this. It started in 1913. And note, and I want you to realize, World War I was the war to end all wars. It was also thought of because this was happening first. Okay, so there's a massive amount of corruption that occurred in World War I. Do you know that they were supplying both sides weapons? Those ugly the gases that they would pour over the sides. The Germans to the British and the British to the Germans, back and forth, and they would have gas masks. And there were these lines of people, men you can see, having their hand on the shoulder of the guy in front of them with wraps over their eyes, who were blinded forever over this stuff. This is just sickness. Even the Geneva Convention pushed this down. But that's when the idiot cabal through the Federal Reserve, or the Federal Reserve, through the cabal, whichever way you want to put it, did some of that stuff. Um, it also includes the stock market crash. Again, I want to get into that too, but that was a false flag event, pre-planned 6 months in advance. The gold standard was killed off by FDR. And we're going to show that a little bit closer. But here's what they did in 1933. They took the people's money at $20.60, and within a year it rose up to $33 per ounce. So what they did is, this is the first level of inflation that started to happen. They even the Bank of France didn't want to do it, and they had 1.5 million ounces of gold, and it was seized, and they gave the value of that money with that $20.60 to it. This is how sick they do it with that. And this is also where we get the concept of the fiat currency with that too. Okay, so this is the background of what they're trying to fund in here, but it comes from the IRS. Now, an interesting point here. What does the Fed say about itself? The Fed, created in 1913 in secret, was a central bank connected to the Fed bankers all around the world, with a fiat manipulated by them. And Volcker, one of the Fed chairman, and during the Reagan administration, said he didn't care who made up the rules, but they got to choose the monetary policies, right? This is what they actually say. What we do, the mission of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, is to maintain stability and public confidence in the financial systems. This is what they were accomplishing with it too. So they actually created it in the 20s and 30s, because they knew they were going to kill off the stock market with this too. FDIC receives no congressional appropriations, which means that they're off on their own, guys. This is what they want to do. I just want to throw this one out to you. This is a fascinating one. This is a real interesting older kind of meme that's out there with that too. And I'm going to pull me off the screen here so you can kind of see it a little closer with that too. But the Fed, so the US government, they collect way more interest now. It's like up at 700%, but this is an older meme with that too. A for-profit company, privately controlled business, deceptively named the Fed, which is just as federal as Federal Express, a company which refuses to reveal the owners, although the Constitution clearly states that the U.S. Congress can make its own money for the United States without a middleman, but and charge ourselves 0% interest. Why? Because the middlemen control about every major television station, radio, newspaper in the country, and they have 300 billion reasons, and frankly now 900 billion reasons to keep it secret. That's how it works. Okay, so what they love doing in here is this. It's corruption, it's legal behavior by the officials and the departure from the original text, which is in 1871. The Constitution says no taxation without fair representation. When have you had fair representation? Now, me, who have been audited more times than I can count, I remember one point of this exact same thing. Now, I remember, I'm going to pull this off the screen for just a half a second with this, because I want you to hear me closer. I remember I got a letter, gosh, what was it, like 2010 or 11? Right when I was going through just major crisis. It may have been 09 or something or other. I don't remember the exact date, but something like that, right? This thing went on for like almost 18 months to 2 years. Now, they actually screwed themselves out of some money because of the way they couldn't go back a certain amount of years. It was funny. I was laughing at them. But what they did is they sent out a letter, and they were doing a random audit. I'm like, a random audit? Yeah, we just do random audits. And so they sent it to my company. And in this, they pulled out, they wanted to have every single invoice over a 2-year period from my hearing aid manufacturers. Like, what does that have to do with anything? They even asked my accountant to like fax over stacks and stacks of documents, right? And like, no, you can come over here and pick it up. I even had the envelope that he had it in. I mean, it was like a Federal Express envelope kind of thing, right? And you got 1 day to get it back to me, or 2 days, or something kind of crazy. There's no way that they could go through them, or they were making copies of it. How crazy is that? And I just said, it's like I feel guilty until proven innocent. Like, oh no, it's not that. Yes, it is. That's exactly what they love doing to people. Now, let's get into this a little closer with that too. But that's what they do. So they don't act like the Constitution. And we paid compound interest for years, and they devalue our money. This is what they do. This is how they accomplish it. And then they charge penalties, and they can put you in jail. And they can do all these other little things, and they come with guns a-blazing. And I'm going to show you an interesting article coming up here in a little bit. So let's pull this off the screen. We're going to show you a IRS history. Comes from them directly, right? So this was done in March of 2019. So they talk about 65 to 76. They're talking about taxes and revolution. Like, so they start with the Boston Massacre that is over the taxation of tea. Like, what? I mean, how do you get to this kind of craziness, right? And yet, this is how they love doing it. Sorry, I'm just bringing it up on the screen here. Then in 1878, Congress approves the Convention of Articles of Confederation. I'm like, wait a second. Power to lay taxes, duties, and imposes excesses, debts, to pay for the debts and provide for common defense. The IRS never, ever has filed within this mandate. But Alexander Hamilton was the first one that started up a central bank. That's one of the bad things about him. They actually have the whiskey revolution. Think about that one for us, rebellion with us too. 75 distillers in Western Pennsylvania appear in court and explain why they shouldn't be arrested for the tax evasion. Now, what were they evading tax on? They were evading tax on sales tax. How does that have anything to do with IRS? Because what they don't want you to look at is the difference between, when they say tax, they're going tax. And yet, there is a significant difference between income taxation and sales taxation, right? So this is part of how they kind of mess with people, right? The War of 1812, this is really important. The War of 1812 makes no sense. Congress passed new internal taxes on refined sugar, carriages, distillers, and auction sales, reinstated the Commissioner of Revenue. Why did they do this? Why do the British come in and then they leave just a little bit after, and they really don't accomplish anything? It's because this was the first bankruptcy of America. So we needed a taxation so that we could pay back the British. Holy cow, you see the point that they do here. Then it says that Treasury gets a new home, right? It goes to DC. The Civil War was one of the very first time frames where Lincoln created an income tax point. So this is that they established the Internal Revenue under the Department of Treasury. This is where it first comes from. Now, it was for a short period of time, and then they sunsetted it pretty much after that time frame. Now, 1863 to 1864, property seizure and tax refunds, right? So the IRS collected $39 million during the Civil War. This is still during the Civil War. And they comprise all suits relating to internal revenue to abate the outstanding assessments and refund tax subject to current regulations. So they screwed the people over. And then it goes through a couple other things. I don't want to hit every little portion of this. And then here's the interesting part. Garfield at this time frame, this is 1870, right? Spearheads an effort to make tax information more private. Why? Because they were trying to get into both sides of this target. I mean, if you really looked at some of these sites, they're fascinating little pictures. Now, they skip over 1871 because that's when the Constitution changes. The first federal income tax comes in the same time frame as 1913 as when they were doing the Fed. How come it happens on the same year? See, they don't want you to think about that, but it does come in the same year as the 16th Amendment comes in the same time frame and a little bit before Wilson signs it in December 23rd of 1913. I'm gonna show you this 1040 form. This is one of the very first 1040 forms. It's so interesting in here too. And then they talk about public awareness. This is right during World War I. I mean, now remember, World War I goes from 1914 to 1918, but the Americans didn't get into it until late 1917. So now they're trying to push out, and they're using a patriotic message to launch an education program because they needed to understand the new tax burden. Why? Because they were making the public pay for what they wanted to play with. I mean, it's like walking into a place and saying, I want to buy that, but I'm not going to pay for it. You're going to pay for it. That's what they did to the department store in essence, right? And then here's a fascinating one, prohibition. Don't think that that isn't part of it too. It's just another way of them getting into some more monies, right? The IRS gets a new home, then they have an even newer home than that time frame. And here's one of their big cases too. Al Capone was famous for bootlegging. They had all this illicit activities, but they got him into jail for 11 years, $50,000 fine, ordered to pay $215,000 of interest and back taxes because he didn't pay the tax situation. Now it's funny because here's the funny thing. All the rest of them said, oh, we're not going to pay taxes. So they found ways to make themselves sovereign. And then they bring in the withholding things. So 1930s, FDR's in vogue, and he is pushing out his own policies. But they were trying to do a Social Security. They were doing Medicare. This is when they did vocational rehab. All these social services. Now, some of them were okay, but they had to come up with a way of taking care of it. So they had payroll withholding. So 1%, your employees were paying 1% of the first $3,000 of their salary to Social Security. Well, it's just another way of draining the funds of the people. They even talked about a victory tax in World War II. So they have to continue to find ways to tax you. And then there's early modernization of the tax thing. So they had to really push forward in their different way. IRS is now created by Truman. And this is right after the Korean War. And then they have communication and support. Oh, it's just like, come on, guys, right? So again, they keep modernizing their situation. And then they visit President Kennedy. Why did they visit President Kennedy? Because he was going to take down the Fed, because he was going to do the silver standard, Executive Order 11110. Okay. But that would have killed off the Fed, and it would have messed up the IRS and killed out the CIA too. So this is when they started to really push punch cards. This is a computerization with that too. And so you kind of see where it goes with that stuff too, without getting too far into that. This is an article I'm just downloading here. Basically, what is a legitimate way for the IRS to contact you? So here's one of the things. I'm going to pull this up a little closer so you can kind of see it a little bit better. If it's hard to see, I'm sorry. But they were talking about the scam of IRS agents. And so there's what they did. They came up with a new law to make it IRS will make in-person visits on rare occasions on the incident requires, but primarily send appointment letters. the 725B, which is what I got, right? And to follow up with a meeting with this stuff too. And then they start talking about the economic impact of the scheme, ERC, all these different ways. And this is what they do to mess with you. So what they're not allowed to do for it anymore is to actually do that whole system. So I'm going to include this article in here that explains some of the stuff that FDR was getting into and how they changed some of the way. Because what the whole point was is to take progressive taxation to soak the rich. It was common in both America and England. Guys, do you understand the connection of the Revolutionary War, that we really didn't get rid of the idiots with that stuff too? This is the sickness of the systems. But let's show you how Trump is talking about it, because some people go, I don't get it. I don't think this NESARA thing is real. I don't believe it's going to happen. Well, guess what Trump starts saying here?
Ravages of Kamala Harris's inflation nightmare. It's a total nightmare. I'm promising no tax on Social Security benefits. This cruel double taxation of Social Security benefits only came into existence in 1984, and at the time it only affected a small number of recipients. Now nearly half of all seniors are forced to pay income tax on Social Security.
Wait. How do you have no taxes on Social Security? By the way, that was never supposed to be that way, because they were not taxable even from the 1913 to 1933 to the 50s. They found a way to kind of create that system with it too. Let me show you another statement that he actually says.
There will be no taxes on overtime. No taxes on overtime. We will terminate the Green New Scale.
And let me pull up another one here. It didn't load up here, but I'm going to show you this one. This is also cool.
And when I'm back in that beautiful White House, we will pass larger tax cuts for workers. And we have a special tax that here is going to do, I think, quite well. It's called no tax on tips. No tax on tips.
Really? Interesting,
No tax on tips. Did you see when I announced that a long time ago, all of a sudden she announced it, and she was met with rebuke. And they can't do it anyway because they have so much legislation in that makes sure that you pay your tax on tips. And it didn't go over too well, but we are going to do it. We'll get it done. Yesterday.
Oops. Wow. Now, I didn't show you that. So what I just showed you is no tax on Social Security, no tax on tips, and no tax on overtime. Now, let me pause for half a second here, okay? I'm a business owner. I put in the payroll with this. Let me tell you, as my payroll company actually has upgraded themselves over the years, so I see all of my employees on the screen, right? And so if I have hourly employees, I have hourly employees, I have, salaried employees. I have salaried with commission, salary with bonus, right? Hourly with bonus. I mean, all this kind of structure points that I have. So what the columns will read is that I'll have here's your hourly stuff. Now, I've already preloaded each person as a salary or an hourly person, right? So the people who are, when they send me an email, they kind of, load in, I did, so many hours in that time frame, right? And then they tell me how much PTO. So I'll load in that number of hours. I'll load in the number of PTO that comes out of their own bank of PTO hours, right? And then if appropriate for that person, because almost everyone's getting a bonus type of structure with this. So this is kind of how I like doing that stuff, right? And so in the bonus structure, it will say either bonus area or they'll have a commission structure point. Now, there also is ways that you have pre-tax dollars for simple IRAs or other kinds of things, right? So I'm going to repay someone back because, you know, of whatever circumstance we pre-agreed on. Okay. Now, pre-tax dollars are very specific in what they are, but to have no taxes on overtime and no taxes on and these are payroll points, right? No taxes on overtime and no taxes on tips. Tips would be like bonuses. They would be set in the same bonus structure. Now, I'm not talking about bonus structures like you get a $5,000 bonus from your company. That actually pushes you in a different realm. Like if you made $50,000 a year, but at the end of the year you get a $5,000 bonus, they're going to tax you at a lot higher rate because they're going to put capital gains tax points on here. But if you're just talking about the monthly amounts, it's in the same tax rate, whatever you have set up here, right? So I'm just giving you the background. You cannot, when you see your W-4s at the end of the year, you cannot tell the difference between your hourly, your salary, or your commission structure, bonus, anything else. It just comes out with like $50,000 that you make, or $52,483 and 38 cents, whatever the number might be, right? And that is what it shows. So when you look at taxation, and then it will show you actually how much you had removed for federal or state, Social Security, or Medicare. What Trump is saying in a sidelong way, and he's only been saying that in the last few months, they're killing off the IRS. And I know many people go, I don't see the evidence. I have people that ask me all the time, wait, I need to see online on a government form that NESARA is going through. I just showed you videos. Let's show you another video and how they actually talk about it. This is hysterical. It goes on for a little bit here, so we'll show you this little part here too.
Former President Trump's tax proposals become reality, would it shift the USA to a more consumption-based tax system, or at least away from a system that is built mostly on taxing income? And what could the impact be on Americans and the economy? Joining us now to discuss is Brendan Duke, the Senior Director of Economic Policy at the Center for American Progress Action Fund, and Casey Mulligan, Professor of Economics at the University of Chicago.
Let's just think about that for a second. Wait a second. So, like, I think this is the professor over here, and this is the guy from taxation policy kind of stuff. I mean, like, he's from the government in the executive branch in some creative wacko circumstance of what they're doing, right? Listen to these guys.
Go. Casey Mulligan, let me begin with you. Let's talk about tariffs and their power to generate income or revenue for the federal coffers here. How much could those tariffs add, and who pays tariffs? Do foreign countries, foreign companies, and foreign individuals pay the tariffs, or do Americans pay the tariffs? Casey?
On the revenue question, we have, a lot of what we buy in America is from America, regardless of whether we have tariffs. So there's a limited amount of our spending out there that can be tariffed. And some of the rates that I've heard people talk about, I'm not sure where that's coming from. In the Republican platform that President Trump presented in Milwaukee and was adopted by the RNC refers to baseline tariffs. I don't expect those to be all that large, although it's a whole Republican operation. So a Republican Congress and House would have to decide what they mean by baseline tariffs and how much.
Brendan, let's talk about the idea that part of what may be afoot here, as President Trump has moved away in his proposals to exempt overtime, tips, and Social Security income from taxes. Is he moving away from a reliance on the income tax as the principal way the federal government is funded, and in any sense toward a consumption tax?
Yeah, sure. So as you guys said, he's proposed about $10 trillion of tax cuts, basically all on the income tax side. So that reduces our reliance on income taxes, which the wealthy disproportionately pay. On the other hand, he has pitched 10 to 20% tariffs on every imported good entering the United States, which is a consumption tax. In some sense, as Vice President Harris has said, works in effect like a national sales tax. So that's raising our reliance on consumption taxes, which low and middle income families are going to pay more of than they do income.
Okay, so I had it wrong. This is the guy that's from the government with this too. Look at what he's saying here. Okay, this is the most regressive tax policy conceivable. Wait a second. Wouldn't you call it progressive? No, because the Democrats don't want a taxation regression. Okay? Second thing, it would lead to a one-time surge of inflation. Oh, would it? Why? Because here's the problem. They spend more than they can do. That's the portion of inflation. He doesn't even have a clue where inflation comes from. Inflation doesn't come from taxation. Inflation comes from an overspending, number one, of the government, and number two, from an over creation of cash that they don't really have. It's writing checks when you don't really have the money to have it in there too.
Taxes. So it's a shift of our revenue mix from income taxes to consumption taxes. And in that way, there's actually some similarities to traditional Republican ideas, of shifting our reliance to a sales tax or a VAT, but in kind of a weird way, and actually a way that could.
I mean, and now remember, he goes, in a weird way. Then he's like, well, yeah, you would have less taxation in your, see, and again, be careful when you ask me about taxation, because are you talking about sales tax? Are you talking about property tax? Property tax, we're gonna get into the property tax one. We will talk about the sales tax, the consumption tax later. And I'll bring that one out again when we do that conversation. But what they're saying is that, oh, even though you'll have less income tax in your thing, well, it's still going to cost you more money in sales tax. No, it won't. Consumption tax depends on how much you spend. And if you don't spend a ton of money, you still can't come up with a way how sales tax could cost you more money than the income tax. Right? This is how nuts it is with that too. Let me show you I'm going to share the screen again. We're going to do a particular conversation. We're going to show you online here with this. The timelines in tax history. Okay, so a moralistic tax policy in the 1930s. So he's talking about FDR. They go through this kind of thing. I'll leave the article in here. 1933, they started to change. By the way, 1933 is when we got off the gold standard. Okay. And so they started to change the rules in the banking committee. So they're starting to mess with people, crying anguish over the high heavens of the millions of dollars of white-collar workers discovered that they had, let's see here, I'm going to have to read it from here, had been nicked for a considerable percentage of their income from 1930 to 1931, when J.P. Morgan partners paid no income tax at all. They never have and they never will, okay? So it goes through, and it's fascinating, this article. It just goes through and tells you all the ways that they were trying to present it as a wealth tax act. And what it was made to be is 1913 to 1933, the IRS taxation was supposed to be only 1% for the top 1%ers, right? This is how they frame it. Now, we will deal with this one a little bit more too. But time to say goodbye to income taxes, examining the national consumption tax. So what it's talking about here is interesting points here. So, and the fair tax people have been talking about this for a long time, but fair tax have been proposing this kind of a concept. A 23% tax rate on gross payments and taxable property and services. It's still an income tax, right? Exclusions, purchases for business investments, exports, blah, 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 blah. Rate adjustments after 2025. So they're talking about moving that rate down. Family consumption allowances, monthly tax reports, IRS dissolution. Now, this is a very interesting point. Time limit on income tax repeal. So they're talking about phasing it out over a several year period of time, up through from 2025 to 2027, right? And yet this is a close point here. So why do we want to change the systems? Because, and then they're going to tell you the potential drawbacks of the national consumption, which is sales tax, would be would be this. There are also some cons which increase costs for lower income households who tend to spend more money than they earn, and the potential for higher prices for goods and services through taxation. What? National consumption would need to be 30% to replace the conventional tax structure. What? Oh, because they don't want to reduce their own their budget on the federal level. They want to increase that number. See, this is the reverse thinking. This is the stupidity. Now I want to show you lastly this one here, bring it up on the screen, but this was the original income tax 1040 form, easy 1040, but everyone would fill this one out. So you put your gross income, your deductions, and your net income, and then we'd talk about dividends, earnings, all these other little potentials, your total exemptions, and your total taxable income. Now what they would do, now look at this number, 1% from $20,000 to $50,000. Now remember, 1913, man, most people didn't make more than $10,000 to $20,000 at all. You're talking about the upper wealthy people. 2% 50 to 70,000, 75, 3% 75 to 100. I mean, look at these numbers. See, today that's a wholly different thing, right? I mean, most people are making 50,000 at least. I mean, the average income is around 50-ish. But in this circumstance, this would have been like saying someone at $50,000 would be like someone making 150,000. And these would be like millions and millions and millions, right? So if you hit up into that line, you were able to, you had to pay more money. Well, what does it do? It just says that you need to add more deductions in here. So you should go through your form and find all kinds of different deductions that you can add up in there and mess with the taxation so that you could do this. And you have to have an affidavit of someone, someone actually it talks about instructions and how to do that kind of thing. And basically this, guys, pull this off the screen. Okay, so as we end up here, what I was trying to give you is a full glimpse of this thing. It's incredibly fascinating when you realize the screwed up nature of the systems. And so it's actually very simple to do. Number one, you have to rein in Congress and Senate. So you have to have, and Trump actually talks about this. We'll get into this one, a video that he actually made that about Elon Musk. So what happens is that you reduce the budget. And by the way, if you and I, we have all been there before, right? Let's say you lose your job. And I'm going to give you a perfect example. I was making a little bit less than my wife. First part of marriage, right? And we were living on the dual income. So it was about, and when she lost her job, we lost 56% of our income. I mean, it was like, boom, like that. And she was out of work for, basically 4 months. I gave her some time, but boy, it was tight. I mean, we weren't prepared to go from this to this. We weren't living like one income. We were living with two incomes. And so we weren't spending all of that. We were probably spending about 75% of it, but we were way over budget. And I mean, those first months were peanut butter and jelly every lunch, where I used to go out for lunch, right? And I started to learn once we had pulled it back and reined it in to a one income thing, we started to change our process. It was the best thing that could have ever happened to us in a really sad way. But what it did is it made us live within a budget. Now, when NESARA happens, you are going to have to find a way to live within budgets. People talk about there's going to be like more money and everyone's going to have tons of money. And here's the thing. If everyone had a ton of money, no one would go to work. That's why I can't stand about this UBI thing that, you have all this money out there and you're going to get, some monthly UBI, yearly UBI, 5,000 million, whatever, I mean, it's just crazy stuff. Stop. Because The moment that you have a UBI, I promise you most people will look at it as their own personal lottery winnings. They will not participate in the system, meaning go to work. And that means more than 75% of the people, I promise you, 75% of the people would not work. And that would be horrible for all the systems, because no one can be at the stores. No one can be in any service industry. No one's doing anything. And what happens is cost would rise dramatically because, by the way, only a few people are working, and they would be overworked, and there'd be people with money, but they don't have the ability to spend it because there's no place to spend it on. And then the sales tax revenue would go down and the whole system would collapse. Okay. Trust me, I've done the math on that thing. If you do a macro view, you can't have that. But when we have the system of consumption-based tax, which is a use tax, which is how the Constitution calls it, we totally and rapidly change the systems, because people who don't have as much money don't spend as much. And so it's not as much of a burden on them. You spend a bunch of money, it's going to be more of a burden. We'll talk about that. I hope that helps you out, guys. If you go to drscottyoung.com, you can kind of download some cool things that gives you some information here. But like and subscribe. It really helps me out if you do that on the YouTube channel. Thank you so much.